Hi Reddit. I'm 42F, and I've been debating for a long time whether or not to post this. But something about last weekend made me realize I can't keep pretending anymore. I've spent most of my adult life tiptoeing around my family, minimizing, rationalizing, excusing. But there's only so much a person can take before something inside just snaps. This story isn't explosive in the way you might expect. There's no wild screaming match or dramatic exit. It's slower, colder, like standing outside your own home and realizing the door's been locked from the inside, and everyone you love is pretending they don't hear you knocking. Let me back up a bit. I come from a small-town family with deep roots. My parents, Camilla and Dean, have lived in the same house since before I was born. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and reputations matter. A lot. I have one sibling, my younger brother Julian, 38M. To anyone outside the family, Julian is the picture of success. He's got the big house, a well-paying job in real estate, 2 kids, and a wife, Evie, who runs the local PDA like she was elected to office. Together, they host all the major family holidays, have matching monogrammed mugs, and send out photo cards every year with coordinated outfits. Me? I live about 2 hours away, in a modest apartment above my studio. I run a small design business, logos, packaging, book covers, and I'm happy. Genuinely. I don't have a husband or kids, but I've got close friends, a dog named Willow, and a life I built on my own terms. I've always been more reserved than Julian, more introverted, and I guess less interested in appearances. Growing up, it was clear Julian was the favored one. I know that sounds bitter, but it's just the truth. If he brought home AC, it was, he must be overwhelmed. If I brought home an A-dash, it was, what happened? When he forgot my mom's birthday once, she laughed it off. When I missed a cousin's baby shower because of a client emergency, I got a 3-paragraph text about how I didn't prioritize family. I've spent years letting these things go. Birthdays I wasn't invited to until the night before. Group photos I was mysteriously excluded from. Gifts I gave that never got opened in front of me. It was always small things. Small things that added up. Which brings me to last weekend. My parents were celebrating their 45th wedding anniversary. Big milestone. Apparently, Julian and Evie had been planning a surprise party for weeks, maybe months. I didn't find out until 11 days before, and even then, it was through a short message from Julian that read, "Hey, we're doing something for Mom and Dad on the 13th. You can come if you want. At our place." That was it. No invitation. No time mentioned. No details. At first, I assumed it was a last-minute thing, but when I called my mom a few days later just to check in, she said, "Oh, Julian and Evie have been working so hard on the anniversary plans. They've had the caterers booked since May." That's when I realized I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been left out. I should have taken the hint. But I kept thinking, this is about Mom and Dad. Not Julian. Not Evie. Not me. So I decided to go. I took time off work, bought a dress, wrapped the gift I'd been quietly working on for months, a framed collage of their wedding photo, their first home, pictures of them with us as kids, all cleaned up and restored digitally. I even printed a little caption that said 45 years of love, laughter, and family in gold lettering. When I pulled up to Julian's house that Saturday, I sat in the car for a full minute before going in. It wasn't nerves exactly. It was that creeping feeling you get when you realize you're entering somewhere you weren't really invited to, but you're showing up anyway, because you should be welcome. Evie answered the door. She looked surprised to see me, even though Julian had technically invited me. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She stepped aside without a word, just enough for me to slip in past her. The house was packed, tables covered in white tablecloths, music playing softly, people chatting in little circles. I spotted familiar faces, family friends, neighbors, our aunt from Oregon. All of them dressed in pastels, like there had been a theme I hadn't gotten the memo on. I stood there awkwardly for a moment before Julian appeared from the kitchen, holding a stack of paper plates. He stopped when he saw me. "Oh, you made it." No hug, no smile. He handed me one of the plates, cracked along the edge, clearly from the bottom of a box, and pointed toward the backyard. "Food's outside. We didn't think you'd want to come." I froze. Not because of what he said exactly, but how he said it. Like I was some distant relative who'd wandered in off the street. I didn't respond, just nodded and walked past him, gripping the broken plate like it was something solid to hold on to. When I got outside, I saw the tables were already full. Little name cards sat neatly at each setting. My name wasn't on any of them. I found an empty patio chair off to the side, near the garden hose and some empty planters. Sat down there. A few minutes later, Evie came outside. She walked right by me, then doubled back like she just remembered I existed. "Oh," she said, "we only rented enough chairs for the people who RSVP'd. You know, since we didn't hear back from you." I opened my mouth to say that I hadn't been given anything to RSVP to, but she'd already turned away. That's how the rest of the afternoon went. Quiet stares, short remarks. No one asked me about my work, or my life, or the framed gift I'd carefully wrapped in tissue and ribbon and left on the side table by the front door. No one even touched it. Eventually, the photographer arrived. He started calling people up in groups, siblings, cousins, old family friends. I stood near the doorway, waiting. Every time a group was called, I stepped forward, thinking maybe this was the moment. But it never came. Julian said loudly at one point, "We're keeping it to household families, just for consistency." Evie nodded beside him. "Plus, group photos get messy. Some people don't like being included anyway." They didn't look at me, but they didn't have to. I stood there, invisible, until the photographer finished snapping the last shot and walked over to Julian with a clipboard. I could see it clearly, $3, 200. A glossy printed invoice with a signature line at the bottom. I looked at the total, then looked back at the two of them, smiling and laughing and congratulating themselves like they'd just hosted a royal gala. And in that moment, something in me went very, very still. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I sat on the edge of the garden path for a long time after the photographer packed up and left. It was chilly now, the late afternoon breeze tugging at the hem of my skirt. The sound of silverware clinking on ceramic drifted from the backyard, mixed with laughter and the occasional shout from one of Julian's kids. I looked down at the cracked plate still sitting on my lap. I hadn't touched the food. I couldn't. It wasn't even about the meal, it was everything else. The way people glanced at me and quickly looked away. How no one even asked where I was sitting or why I hadn't eaten. I might as well have been the gardener who wandered in by mistake. My parents hadn't said much either. They were seated at the head table, looking tired but content. My mom waved at me at one point from across the yard, but didn't get up. My dad seemed completely absorbed in whatever Julian was saying to him. Something about expansion and commercial property. Eventually, I stood up and slipped inside the house, hoping to find a quiet corner for a moment. That's when I passed the side table where I'd placed my gift. It was still there, unopened, the wrapping slightly wrinkled like someone had nudged it aside to make space for something else. Around it were other gifts, boxes with shiny bows, bags stuffed with tissue paper. But mine sat off to the side, alone. I stared at it for a while. Then I overheard voices coming from the kitchen. "She doesn't even try to fit in. Did you see where she sat?" That was Evie. "Well, you know how she is. She's always been a little outside the circle," said another voice. It took me a second to recognize it. It was Aunt Rhea, my dad's younger sister, who had once told me I reminded her of herself. I guess that was only when no one else was around. I didn't move. I couldn't. Julian said she didn't even RSVP. Can you imagine? Just showing up unannounced like that and expecting a seat. Evie again, her voice sharper now. She acts like she's above all of us. Never married. No kids. Probably thinks she's too creative to send a holiday card. She brought a picture frame, Rhea added. Like this was some casual brunch. Everyone else brought real gifts. They both laughed. I backed away slowly and stepped outside through the side door, heart pounding. Not from hurt anymore, but from something colder. Steadier. A kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just that I was being excluded. It was that they wanted me to know I was being excluded. On purpose. Like they needed me to understand my place and stay in it. I thought about my parents again. How they had barely acknowledged my presence all day. How my mom had once told me, years ago, "You and Julian are just different people, that's all." As if that excused the way she turned a blind eye to everything he did. I remembered birthdays forgotten. Invitations never sent. My mother crying when Julian and Evie bought a house 10 minutes from hers, and then barely blinking when I opened my own business and invited her to the ribbon cutting. It all clicked into place. This wasn't about me being absent. It was about me not fitting the script. I didn't marry young. I didn't have babies. I didn't go to the neighborhood church or host potlucks or post Thankful Thursday updates. I didn't give them grandkids or let my mother redecorate my home as a surprise. I built a quiet, steady life that I liked, and that, to them, made me strange. Maybe even ungrateful. That night, I left early. No one stopped me. No one asked why I hadn't said goodbye. I don't even think they noticed. On the drive home, I thought about the framed collage in its crinkled wrapping, about how carefully I had chosen each image, how I restored the photo of my mom in her wedding dress, her veil blowing behind her like a sail, pixel by pixel, how I'd cropped the one of Dad teaching Julian and me to ride bikes so that none of the worn edges showed. I thought about all the hours I spent on something that no one even glanced at. When I got home, I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I opened my laptop. See, what Julian and Evie had clearly forgotten, or maybe never realized, is that I'm not just some artsy loner who draws for a living. I'm a designer, a good one, and I've built quiet but solid relationships over the years with local vendors, media outlets, small businesses, and, most importantly, event organizers. It started with something simple, an email to the photographer. He was a kind older man named Martin. We'd worked together before on a local book cover shoot. I asked him, politely, if he wouldn't mind sending me copies of the family photos from the event. He replied within a day. Of course. I noticed you weren't in many of the group shots. Was that intentional? You always seem so warm and personable in the work we've done together. I was surprised. I didn't respond to that part. I just thanked him and downloaded every image. I studied them carefully. The angles, the backdrop, the placement of the flower arch, the monogram banner behind my parents' chairs that said, "Celebrating 45 years of devotion," hosted by Julian and Evie. That banner was going to matter. You see, while they spent all that time making sure I felt like an outsider, they'd overlooked one simple thing. I knew how to make stories visible, how to make patterns recognizable. I started drafting an open letter, a piece I'd post when the time was right, not to smear anyone, but to set the record straight. I wasn't rushing it. I was going to take my time. Let them get comfortable. Let them tell everyone how perfect the anniversary had been. Meanwhile, I reached out to a few old contacts, one at the local newsletter, another at the community heritage blog that had once asked for stories from the children of founding families. I asked if they were still looking for personal essays, reflections, real stories from real people about what family meant to them. Both said yes. One even offered to feature it at the top of their anniversary edition for the town's bicentennial. I didn't tell them what it would be about yet, just that it would be honest, and that it might make a few people uncomfortable. And as all this was slowly unfolding, Julian messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, can you take a look at the logo mock-up for my new rental properties? Evie said you'd probably be happy to help." Happy to help. That was the moment something inside me truly turned. Because after all the exclusion, the whispers, the laughter behind closed doors, he still thought I would help. For free. Like nothing had happened. I stared at the message for a long time. And then I smiled. Because I knew something he didn't. He thought I was still the same person I'd always been, the quiet one. The one who lets things go. The one who sips tap water and thanks people for cracked plates. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I didn't reply to Julian's message right away. I let it sit. He'd asked me to look at a logo for his newest rental properties. Apparently, he and Evie had bought up 3 houses near the lake and were planning to launch some kind of short-term rental company. Jalayev Rentals, he called it. His idea of a clever brand. I looked over the design files he'd sent. They were amateur at best. A mix of cursive fonts and stock clip art, completely out of sync with the modern branding needed to attract the kind of clientele they were aiming for. I stared at the screen, knowing full well what he expected. He thought I'd swoop in, fix it all for free, and hand it over like a favor. Just like I'd done 3 years ago, when he asked me to make a digital flyer for Evie's charity brunch. I'd spent 4 hours designing it. Then Evie posted it online and tagged someone else for the gorgeous graphics. I let that slide. Not this time. Instead, I opened a clean document and began to write. Not to Julian. To the editor of the community blog. I titled the essay, "The Seat Without a Name. What Happens When You're Raised in a Family That Won't Acknowledge You." It wasn't cruel. I didn't exaggerate or embellish. I simply told the truth. I described what it felt like to grow up in a household where love was rationed out like sugar, sweet for some, sparse for others. I wrote about the birthday parties where I set the table but wasn't invited to blow out the candles. I wrote about the Christmas when Julian forgot to get me a gift and my parents laughed it off with, "Boys will be boys." I wrote about how, slowly, Invisibility becomes a coat you learn to wear, until one day, you realize you're tired of being cold. And yes, I included the anniversary. I described the cracked plate, the missing chair, the unopened gift, the whispering in the kitchen, the photographs I wasn't in. I didn't name Julian or Evie outright, but anyone in town who read it would know. They'd know exactly who I meant. Before submitting it, I sent a draft to my friend Marianne, who teaches journalism at a nearby college. She read it and called me right after. "It's devastating," she said, "but it's good. It's not spiteful, it's honest. Are you ready for the fallout?" I said yes. I wasn't, not really, but I needed to say it. The blog published it on a Monday morning, 2 weeks after the anniversary party. It went live at 7:15 a.m. By 9 o'clock, my inbox had 3 dozen messages. The local newspaper asked if I'd be willing to do a follow-up piece. A woman from a neighboring town said it made her cry. A girl I hadn't seen since high school wrote that she'd been through something similar with her own brother and thanked me for giving her words for what she'd felt. Julian didn't text me. Neither did my parents. But Evie did. At 3:12 p.m. Saw your little blog post. Very dramatic. Maybe next time talk to your family before airing dirty laundry. I read it once. Then again. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I replied. It wasn't dirty. It was clean. Cleaner than the way I've been treated for the last 20 years. She didn't answer. Later that week, I received an email from Martin, the photographer. He wrote, "Hi again. Not sure if you heard, but Julian asked for some photos to be removed from my online gallery. Said a few people weren't happy with how they turned out. I'm guessing he meant the group shots. Thought you should know." I thanked him, and I made a note of it, because now I understood what was happening. They were scrambling. The image they had carefully built, of the perfect family, the charming son, the devoted wife, it was beginning to slip. And they knew it. But this was only the beginning. Julian still needed a logo. And as it happened, I had just finished designing 2 versions. The first one was professional, clean, elegant, what he probably expected from me. The second? Let's just say it was an exaggerated reflection of who they really were. I designed a logo that looked polished at first glance. But if you looked closer, you'd see the cracks, too many flourishes, mismatched elements, and a hidden detail in the negative space. A small, tilted chair, tucked just barely behind the rest of the design. The seat without a name. It was subtle. Only someone with a trained eye would notice. I sent both files in one email, with a note. Here are 2 directions. One is sleek and modern. The other is a little more personal. Up to you. Julian chose the second. I laughed. They launched Jalayev Rentals the following week. The logo was all over their social media. The posts were overly enthusiastic, filled with hashtags and carefully staged photos of living rooms and outdoor fire pits. I didn't say anything. I just watched. A few of my colleagues in the design world messaged me privately. "Did you do this logo? It looks like your work, but it feels off." I answered each one truthfully. Yes, it was a custom request. They wanted something that represented them. And it did, more than they realized. The cherry on top came a few weeks later, when the town newsletter released a digital feature titled "The Faces Behind the Stories: Families Who Feel Invisible." My essay was the headliner, and beneath it, a photo collage. They used Martin's photos. I wasn't in any of them, just rows of chairs at decorated tables. My brother beaming with his arm around our parents. Evie smiling wide, holding a champagne flute. The banner in the background, hosted by Julian and Evie. The visual absence was loud, intentional, powerful, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel ashamed of being left out. I felt seen because I told the truth. A few days later, Julian messaged again. "I wish you'd come to us first before making a spectacle." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, "You didn't leave me a seat at the table. I made my own." What happened after that? Well, let's just say the fallout wasn't immediate, but it started to spread. People began asking questions. Our aunt in Oregon canceled her summer visit. A few family friends stopped commenting on Evie's posts. Even the local charity board quietly removed her name from the annual gala invite list. And me? I got an offer from a regional magazine to write a monthly column about personal history and family dynamics. Apparently, people were hungry for stories that weren't sugar-coated. But what really tipped everything over wasn't the essay or the photos. It was what I did with the house. Because remember how I said they were planning to expand their rental business? There was a property 2 blocks down from Julian's house, old Victorian, in need of restoration. He'd been eyeing it for months. Even mentioned in passing that he was thinking of making an offer. He didn't know I already had. He didn't know the owner was my former client's aunt. He didn't know I closed on it 3 days before his financing was approved. And he didn't know what I planned to do with it. The house was everything Julian wanted and nothing he would ever have. It sat at the end of a tree-lined street, just far enough from the main road to feel private, but close enough for foot traffic, perfect for a short-term rental. 3 stories, gabled roof, a wide wraparound porch that creaked in the way old houses always do. It needed work, sure, but it had character, history, charm. I closed on it before he ever had a chance to bid. Quietly. The owner was a kind, older woman named Eloise. Her niece had been one of my first branding clients, years ago, and she vouched for me. When we met, I brought a portfolio of my design work and told her my plan: to renovate the house slowly, thoughtfully, and turn it into a creative retreat, a space for artists, writers, and solo travelers looking to disconnect from the chaos. She loved the idea. She said it reminded her of her late sister, who used to paint in the sunroom during summer visits. Julian didn't find out until he saw the sold sign go up. I got a text that night. "You bought the Kensington house?" Seriously. I didn't reply. He called the next day, left a voicemail, then another. Then Evie emailed me. It would have been considerate to tell us. We were planning to make an offer. I read her message 3 times. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to sit with the irony. They had spent years keeping me out of conversations, out of invitations, out of memories. And now, they were upset because I didn't include them in a decision. The silence that followed was telling. My parents didn't call, not even to ask about the house. I think, by then, they knew that something had shifted, that the daughter they once viewed as distant and passive wasn't so passive anymore. And I wasn't done. Over the next few months, I started renovations on the house. Not flashy ones, intentional ones. I kept the original hardwood floors, preserved the crown molding, restored the stained glass windows with help from a local artisan. I even commissioned a mural in the backyard, a soft, sweeping image of a long table under oak trees, with every chair filled but one. I called the place the Quiet House. It opened in the spring, and I launched the website with care. No fanfare, just word of mouth. Guests started trickling in. Artists from the city, writers working on manuscripts, burned-out teachers who just wanted to read a book in peace. And they came back. I kept my rates reasonable. Built-in little things that people remembered: personalized welcome cards, local pastries, shelves of donated books. I partnered with a few local small businesses to offer workshops. A potter, a floral artist, a calligrapher. Meanwhile, Jalayev Rentals opened their first property that summer. And it flopped. Their online reviews mentioned that the house looked better in photos than in real life. Complaints about the neighbors, who weren't thrilled about the increased foot traffic, noise violations, and the logo. One reviewer even pointed out the odd little chair in the design and asked if it was a joke. The logo became a point of discussion. A few design blogs picked it up and analyzed it, some calling it confusing, others noting it had accidental symbolism. I didn't comment publicly. I didn't need to. Julian emailed again. "Did you do that on purpose?" I replied with just one sentence. "I gave you what you asked for." By the fall, they were trying to rebrand. Quietly, they removed the original logo, hired someone else, closed one of the rentals due to maintenance issues. But the real shift happened at Thanksgiving. It was the first time in years I didn't go to the family dinner. Not because I was uninvited, but because I wasn't interested. Instead, I hosted a private retreat at the Quiet House. 6 women, 2 painters, a poet, a woman recovering from divorce, a retired school principal writing her memoir, and a girl in her 20s who just needed silence after a hard year. We cooked together, sat on the porch in the evenings, shared stories by the fireplace. On the morning of Thanksgiving, while I was walking in the backyard garden, I got a message from my mom. "You're missed today." I stared at the words. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, just distance. I didn't reply. She sent another message later that night. "Julian says you're still angry." That one made me pause. Not because she was wrong, but because of how neatly she'd tucked her role out of the conversation. Like Julian had acted alone. Like she hadn't looked past me at every gathering, or excused every slight, or told me, with a tight-lipped smile. You know how your brother is. I didn't reply to that message either. A week later, a letter arrived at my door. Handwritten. From my dad. It said, "Your mother and I read your article again. Maybe we didn't see how things felt from your side. But that doesn't mean you had to embarrass the family." I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into a drawer. Not to keep it, but to remind myself, if I ever doubted, that they weren't sorry for what they did, only that people saw it. That winter, I changed my phone number, blocked Julian and Evie, muted my parents' emails, and moved forward. The quiet house is fully booked 6 months in advance now. People leave handwritten notes when they check out. Notes that say things like, "Thank you for reminding me I matter." The mural in the backyard has become a favorite spot for guests. Some sit beside the empty chair and take quiet portraits. Some leave flowers. Sometimes I sit there too. Not because I feel empty, but because I know now, there's power in choosing who gets a seat in your life. My parents still live in the same house. Julian and Evie are still playing host. But the invitations have stopped. Maybe they realized I wouldn't say yes anymore. Or maybe they just don't know how to face someone who stopped shrinking to fit. And that's where things stand. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not waiting for an apology that will never come. They built a table that didn't have room for me. So I built my own. And it's full. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.